Thank you. Okay. So supported living, what is it? I guess that's a big question that we get. I think people have a different idea really of what supported living could be, which is as it should be. Because supported living is going to be different for everyone. Supported living simply means living with some support. I mean, we all need support, don't we? But at the end of the day, some people need more support than others. So my son is in supported living. He lives in a house with three other people and he gets 24/7 support, and he has people sleeping. He has somebody sleeping in at night so that he's got that full wraparound. But I do know other people that have somebody coming in during the day, or they have somebody to stay with them at night and need very little support. It all depends on your relatives' individual needs, and it can change. It's still supported living if somebody is living in a house or a flat and people are coming in to give some support, and they need limited amount of support. So if they need 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours a week, just somebody to help them with their shopping, that is still supported living. And I think there's a confusion around that. Supported living is not it's it's different from residential care in the sense that if you're in supported living, you are in a house, you have your house and your care provided separately. So your support provider is separate from your housing provider. Whereas if you were in residential care, if you are unhappy with where your relative lives, in residential care, if you're unhappy and you want to leave, you lose the house, you lose where you're living, as well as the support. You can it's all linked together, and they will be a kind of yeah, it's linked together. So that's the difference. And I think a lot of people don't always get that and don't always understand that that's the difference. Um, went down the supported living route specifically for my son. I mean, there isn't a huge amount. I don't know whether we've got people from outside of Oxfordshire here, because sometimes we do on these calls. Um, but in Oxfordshire, there's very little residential care. It's almost all supported living. Um, and it means that you're supported in a house, in an ordinary street, with ordinary neighbours, in the community. And it doesn't have a big sign on the door that says this is for people with learning disabilities. We are now recruiting or whatever. It's more, for me, it felt like it was more normal. I know normal's not a word we use, but it just felt more ordinary, that ordinary life that we wanted for him to have, and have got for him. But there was also that element of he's if I'm unhappy with the support provider, because we had a personal budget and a direct payment, we could sack the provider, get a new provider, and he wouldn't lose his home. Because if you're Oxfordshire based, which probably most of you are, finding a property is the biggest thing. Okay, I probably said way more on this first slide than I intended to, but that's just kind of setting the scene a little bit, and we'll move on. If we can move on, Kathy. So we got a load of facts and figures. This is England based. We probably don't need to go through all of these, but just to give you an idea about housing and some of the population of people with learning disabilities nationally, and people. That's the other thing around supported living, is you would have a tenancy. So we'll skip that one, Kathy, and go on to the next one. So what do you do first? So there's some of the important things, the important steps you need to take to help you start to plan. Now, this is from Learning Disability England, which is the national body that looks at works with people with learning disabilities. So why move? What's the reason for moving? Who does my relative want to live with, or if anyone? Is it important that they live on their own, or is there somebody they particularly get on with? So again, when we set it up for my son, we had people in mind who he'd known for a long time, and he still lives with two people that he's known since he was 3 years old. So it's choosing who they live with is important. But I do again know other people that can't live with anyone and have to live on their own. So it's a thing to be thinking about right from the start. What kind of home do they want? What area of the country or county do they want to live in? When do they want to move, and what can they afford? We'll come back to the what can they afford bit, because that's a kind of, my son's support doesn't cost him anything, but for some people, apart from his, we'll go. I won't confuse this bit now. Kathy, stop me. Okay, so look, what's important? The things that you need to start thinking about. To start with, you always start with the person themselves. What would a good life look like for them? So what's really important is who they live with. So if you do have people that your sons or daughters or brothers or sisters get on with, and they are at the same stage and they're thinking of moving, have a conversation with the other parents or the other families and say, how do you think they'll get on living together? Because that's the really important bit, isn't it? To choose who you live with. We all have some degree of choice about who we live with. What sort of support they need, what's important to them, what things do they like doing, what helps them to feel safe, what support will they need to do all of these things. So is it with my son, we definitely looked at what are the things that are really important to him, and they were very simple things like having a really good social life, going to the cinema, going swimming, being close to good transport links so we could go outside of the area, and looking at that things from his perspective. So it might be lovely to live in a lovely, Oxfordshire's got some lovely little villages. It might be lovely to live in a lovely little cottage in a nice little village, but are they going to ever leave because the bus only comes intermittently, or and you don't get drivers on duty? So have a think about where they live is really key. My screen has gone completely blank, Kathy, so you might have to take over this bit.
Okay.
What's
It
happened
frequently
there?
happens, doesn't it?
It's gone
Uh,
black for some reason. I don't know why.
okay. So yeah, so as Gail mentioned, transport is really important because sometimes you might have a mobility card that goes with your relative to wherever they may live, but more often than not, that isn't the case. And so just being on good transport links is key. What do they enjoy doing? Part of their support will probably include going to buy their own groceries, to help them, to maintain their and to go to I don't know. My daughter loves going shopping, so that's one of her main things to do. So for us, when we started looking at supported living opportunities, we wanted to make sure that she was in an area that she could actually walk. So she lives in Whitney, right in the centre, and she can walk everywhere, which is really good because it's actually also good for her exercise as well. Just having enough
Okay,
space. So you're back.
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry about
Um,
that. My
that's all
screen, I'm
right.
having issues with my laptop.
Um,
But yeah, that's absolutely right. The being near shops or having things that are important to them nearby. So a really good idea when you start thinking about planning is maybe to do a kind of diary, or think about the things that they do during the week. Think about the type of support they might need to do those things. Um, think about what's important to them initially, always the best place to start, doing that person-centered planning planning approach, thinking about the people they get on with. Can they still do the things they do without having staff that drive all the time?
and I
Um,
think I was going to say, I think also it really depends on where you are in your stage of life as well. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working with quite a lot of older carers at the moment who, the biggest concern for them is when they've still got their relative living at home. We've got somebody who's still got their 63-year-old still living at home, and we're helping them to find the right place to move to. We know that elderly parent cannot, actually get to and from easily to wherever that person's going to be living. And so for them, it's so important that they have them living close by, because as we know, just jumping on a bus isn't something that's easy for them to do now. So it's just thinking about, where you're at in your journey. Would it be better to have them near? We realize that that's a big ask often, because it sometimes comes down to what's available, and whether actually what is available has compatible people in that house. So as much as we talk about the theory of things, we've also got to look at the reality, which is something we'll come on to a little bit later as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. So yeah. I talked about person-centered planning. I mean, everything we do at OxFSN is kind of rooted in this approach. So do think about it. If it's done properly, it is life-changing, and it is, it's the way we did everything for my son. It's the way we've worked with him. There are some really useful tools that you can use to help you gather some of that key information that you will need for the next steps. And I think that is thinking about what's important to them and what's important for them. So, what's important to them and how best to support them. What support do they need to do the things that are important? Will help you think about. So, for instance, if it's really important for somebody to go swimming, do they need two people to take them? Do they need to get transport there? Do they need somebody to help them? What get undressed, dressed in and out of all of those kind of things. It helps you to think about what support they need. Now you'll have some of that already, because some of you, will be doing those things yourself. So again, the diary is really helpful to do that. When we take him to visit or her to visit so and so, this is what we do, and this is the support that's needed. So it's kind of breaking it down so you've got an idea of what support is needed without you being involved. Things like the relationship circle are really helpful, because then you can think about who are the key people in their lives that they want to stay in touch with. A lot of providers think down the next of kin route. So who is the next of kin? That's the person. You need to be looking at the wider family. If they were still living at home, would they still be visiting with cousins and aunties and brothers and sisters and various other wider family? So who are the people that are important to them in their life is really important. And think about what a good day, bad day would look like for somebody, so you can avoid some of those bad days. Um, I also think the matching of staff is, I mean, that kind of is a wishful thinking in lots of ways, because to be honest, like I said, we did say warts and all, getting staff in supported living is very tricky at the moment. It's not great out there for getting staff. But matching support, who are the right people to be working with your relative? What qualities do they need to have? What type of things do they enjoy doing? The way I would look at it is, there's no point having somebody who uh, doesn't like football supporting somebody to football. You want somebody who's got that enthusiasm and share that with you, don't you? We did have at one point somebody who didn't want to go swimming, and Guy at that point, my son Guy at that point, was going twice a week, and to me that was like employing a bus driver that couldn't drive, because actually, if you can't do that bit of the job, then you can't do the job. He needs somebody who's going to take him in the water and be safe and be swimming with him, because that's important to him. So she didn't stay very long. She moved to another house where they didn't go swimming. So it's thinking about things from that perspective as well that's important.
And I think
Next.
I think the reason to do person-centered planning is we as a parent, we do everything automatically. We know our young person, our relative inside out. But it's just sometimes getting it down onto paper helps us really see the bigger picture. And it's also really important when it comes to do the assessment, which is kind of your starter for that move with your social worker. And it also helps with the matching of making sure that your relative is kind of when you're looking for something through brokerage, through the county council, that really helps them try and make sure that they're looking for places that are going to be suitable for your relative. Because without this information, you could end up in a situation where on paper it might look right, but it might not be right if they haven't got enough detail. Just to
So
say,
it's the detail, isn't it? Sorry.
it is detail, yeah. We've got I can see there's 4 questions, but I can't see what the questions are. So can we just check what those questions are?
Have
So
a look at the chat.
yeah.
So,
Two of them, I've put the links to the person-centered websites. Can only see one,
yeah, it's a
and that's
comment, really. Thank you.
yeah. But Tatiana's just mentioning about without the person-centered planning workshops, she'd have found it sort of difficult to do this process of supported living. So
I
That's
think it's
good to
sorry,
know.
sorry for interrupting, but it's those things like important to you for your person, to your person. It was actually quite crucial. The comments you made and the examples you gave was actually really, really helpful because my son
Good.
currently is at the care settings, and that plan was it was a basis for their care plan, and it's
Yeah.
very detailed, and it was the only reason why he successfully transitioned because of that plan.
That's really helpful to know. Thank you. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's it's been something I've lived by for since my son was 12. So I absolutely am, evangelical when it comes to person-centered planning. But it does work. Thank you for that. Um, Cassie, yeah, if we can move on to the next slide. So think about housing. What sort of housing, what sort of home are they looking for? We talked a little bit at the beginning about, can they live with other people? Is it a flat or a house on their own? Is it living with another family, which is something called shared lives, which is an option at the moment. And that works for some people, not for everyone, but it does work for some people who want to take that step away from their own family but live with another family and have that support. Are they going to be sharing with a friend, like lots of young people do? Are they moving into a shared house that's already there, that already exists? That would be a case of, there's a vacancy in this house. Somebody has moved out, and there's a spare bedroom. They don't always use that language, but that's basically what they're talking about. They'll talk about avoids and all sorts of things. But a shared house that's already there, that would be, you'd need to look then at, the matching the people. Does it fit? We had a spare bedroom in our house for nearly 2 years before we found the right person to move in. Because for me and the other parents, it was really essential that we didn't just move anyone in because it would upset the kind of balance of the house, and it wouldn't work if you hadn't done that proper research beforehand. So it's got to be right. They've got to get on with people. You wouldn't move into a house either. I did hear from one family who were told that their son could go and live in a house and their family weren't allowed to know about the other people living there, which was a big no-no for me. And I made that very clear when I was supporting the family at the meeting, because you would never move in. Would you do that yourself? That's the question. Would you move into a house where you didn't know the other people you were going to live with? No. Why should your son or daughter? So make sure, so if somebody says that to you, if a provider says we can't share that information due to GDPR or whatever reason, then there's ways around that they can do. If they're saying no, then walk away, I would say, actually, because because there's ways of doing it that don't share personal details, but just give you a flavour of the type of people that they're going to be living with. So that's an option. That's probably the most common thing that happens, is people get placed in a house with other people that other people have deemed suitable for their relative. So be very wary of that approach, in the sense that you need to be checking, and you can say no if you don't think it's going to work for your relative. You can say no and ask them to come up with alternatives. So don't be frightened to say no.
And my advice there would be that when you reach that process, and if you're working with brokerage at Oxfordshire County Council, which a majority of people do.
You probably should explain what brokerage is, because we've jumped into brokerage, haven't we? Do you want to explain what brokerage is, Kathy?
Yeah, brokerage is when you how do you explain it? So brokerage is a term that's used by the county council. They commission a number of support providers to run houses across Oxfordshire. And it means Oxfordshire County Council have the first, they are able to have say who's going to go into those houses, basically. And then, so what happens is you do an assessment, your social worker presents it to panel to say whether somebody meets the criteria for supported living, and then the information goes to a team called brokerage, who will look at matching your relative to what is available across Oxfordshire. So it's just kind of a team that work basically to place, for the want of a better word, people in housing in Oxfordshire. But what I would say is that often you might be given something, it might not be in the right area that you're looking for. It might be, from what you've heard, it doesn't sound suitable. My advice would be to go and look at any place you are offered. And the reason we say that is because it gives you a better idea of what's out there. It gives you something to compare to. One of the hardest things is, I think, to understand what supported living might look like. But the more places you go and see, the more it gives you an idea of what it is that is going to work and isn't going to work. So, and it kind of helps you with the evidence of saying, actually, no, I've seen this and that's not going to work because of this. But actually, this is what I'm looking for. We know this will work. So we will always recommend that, even though you may think, no, it's not going to work, go along and see it. Sorry, didn't mean to jump in there.
No, that's great. Thank you. Really helpful. And so the next bit is around residential care. As we said, there's not a huge amount of residential care in Oxfordshire. There is some, and it can be right for some people if that's the approach that they want to take. And quite often it's out of county. And then there's also extra care housing, which is usually what older people have. So my mum was in extra care housing, so she had somebody kind of on site that was there to sort of help her to do things. But extra care housing is also more and more, they're looking into it more, aren't they, for people with learning disabilities who need a limited amount of support, a smaller amount of support, that have their own front door, that can come in and out as they want, that don't need support full time, but might need a bit of help managing their money, or doing their cooking, or doing a bit of shopping with them, and or being worried they're being there on their own at night, possibly. So there's again, it's going back and what is it that your relative needs? What support do they need? How will that look? Is absolutely the starting point. So before you do anything else, looking around, get it mapped out exactly what it is that they need. And then you can start to think, well, actually, that might be right for them. And then go and have a look. Thanks,
and at the moment, extra care housing tends to be for people 55 and over.
Yeah.
But as Gail said, it's something that I think the county council are realising that does work well for some people. So if you think it's something that's right for your relative, and you're working with a social worker, and they're coming back to you and saying, well, actually, you've got to be 55 and over, push back and say, actually, we've heard that there is movement to try and make this more accessible. Sorry, accessible, but hate using that word. But it's something that's happening in Oxfordshire, because it's really helpful for, I think, the county council and the commissioners to know that people are thinking that this is a good route to go.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, Kathy. Thanks.
Right,
So we won't go through all of these because we've talked a little bit about some of those, but these are some of the options. The slides, as I said, will be shared. So you've got a chance to look at. There's also, different things in different areas. So if you live in another area, that there might be different options, but these are the usual kind of options for people.
And if anybody else after the slides, you've got any questions about any of these, please do come back to us and just, email us and we can go through them at a bit more detail. But it's just so much information out there. It's just too much to go through in a presentation.
And again, these are the supported living options that we know that families have used, the families that we've worked with, or families that we know. So there's a whole list of different options for people. We do know people with a shared house, like my son. There's also shared houses with private landlords. There's a whole range. There's a whole range of different options. So there's much more out there than you kind of think, really, initially when you get started. But it's just looking to see what will be best for your relative.
And I just to give a little praise here of what we did is we actually own the property that my daughter lives in, so we are the landlords. And the way we did that is that we kind of worked with 3 other families who we knew that India has known and would really enjoy living with, and we talked to them. We bought the house, and then we rented it out to as a business for a year and a half, because it took us 2 years, even owning the house, to actually get everything set up for India. That was working with the social workers, finding a support provider. But so we actually have gone in and we owned a property. I will say it's quite a lot of work as a landlord, because the wear and tear of having 4 people who probably don't take quite so much care of a property as maybe we would our own. Plus also they've got 24-hour support. So there's a team of about 8 people, not all there at the time, but at any one point, I would say there's probably a maximum of 5 people in that house. And that means a lot of wear and tear. So there's ups and downs, but it means that we know that our daughter we wanted to make sure that she had a place to live for the rest of her life, which, it does work going through other routes too, but that was actually something that was really important to us. And we worked with them and everybody moved in together at the same time. And I have to say, I mean, it has a few blips, but overall, we've been really happy with the way it's worked.
Yeah. And we weren't in a position to be able to purchase anywhere, because like a lot of people, but we went through found a provider, and then they found the house, but the housing is separate from the provider that way. So that, there's, as I say, there's different ways of doing it.
I'm just going to flick through these, because again, these are things you can look at and read through as you start to kind of identify what it is that you think might work best for your relative. You can look at these, and we've tried to kind of give the advantages and disadvantages of the different setups, because there are advantages and disadvantages to everything you do. And I think what we would say is that, you've got to kind of work out what's right for you as a family. So these are all different things. Sorry, I'm going to flick through them quite quickly. Oh, hang on. Missed the important one. There we go.
Okay. So what is needed to help your relative? We've got nobody left us so far. We've still got people with us, so that's good. No, just checking that we haven't bored everyone. So yeah, I guess the first thing we should have said right at the very beginning was this doesn't happen overnight. So it takes a lot of planning. So, you know, like Kathy said, they've got the house, they'd even got the house, and it still took a while to get things. I would say if you are looking into supported living for your relative, give yourself at least 2 years minimum to start the planning and to do it all properly. It is, it feels like a long time, but it'll go very quickly. But it is really important that you put those foundations down right at the start, and you'll be grateful for that later. Sorry, got a question from Mandy there. Hi, Mandy. What's the best way to find out more about the option you mentioned for yourself, Kathy?
Well, I can talk to you about that. That's probably the easiest thing. So if you want to contact me after this, I'll talk through how we went around it, how we went through the process, because we learned a lot along the way,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I think that's it, isn't it? It's learning, it's sharing what you've learned as you've gone through, so that others can avoid some of those pitfalls, really, or just be aware. Sometimes knowledge is, power type of thing, isn't it? That you know what's coming. So what do you need? So firstly, you need a social care needs assessment and a support plan through adult social care. So in order to get the funding for this, you need to be in the system. So if your relative is currently living at home, and you maybe they go to a day service, or maybe they're still at college, at whatever stage you're at, you need to approach adult social care for a needs assessment, and you need to say, look, we are looking into supported living. We need a new assessment. We need an assessment based on, to see if he's going to be eligible for that. Don't be put off because we hear this quite a lot. We have done recently. We've heard, oh, they won't be eligible for supported living. They don't know until they've done an assessment. Nobody knows who is eligible for anything. The assessment cannot be refused. So you have to go back and just keep saying, we need an assessment. You can't refuse. Under the Care Act, the care assessment cannot be refused. If somebody has eligible needs, and we did this when we did our Care Act assessment, so have a look. I think that's online still, isn't it, Kathy? Our
Yes, it is, yeah.
Presentation on that. So go back and have a look exactly what the rules are around that. I won't go into it here because we'll run out of time. So that's the key. That's the way in, getting that support plan, and thinking about the budget. How much money have you got to spend to pay for that support? So the personal budget, you can get a personal budget through a direct payment or a managed account. If your care is funded through the NHS, there's through something called Section 117 aftercare or continuing healthcare. Section 117 aftercare is when somebody has been in hospital due to their mental health issues. So if they've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and been in one of the assessment and treatment units, then they'll come through on Section 117 aftercare. And continuing healthcare. Now we've got a presentation on continuing healthcare. Hands up. I don't know a huge amount continuing healthcare, so I'm looking forward to really finding out more about that. And you can have a personal health budget. Okay, so somebody's just said they were on what was that? Sorry. Social worker left 3 years ago and we're still on an emergency waiting list. Do we need one to start the process? Yes, I would say you absolutely need a social worker to start the process. You don't have they don't have an entitlement to a social worker. They have an entitlement to a social care service. They should still, I would go back and say, we need an assessment, request an assessment, basically. So start the process again and you'll get allocated a new social worker. And And yeah, I don't get if it was so it was an emergency social worker 3 years ago, and the emergency is gone, presumably. Is that why the social worker is not there? Sorry, it's difficult to know who asked the question.
Oh, Sylvia, was it you? Do you want to unmute and then you can
Yeah, our social worker left about 3 years ago.
Right.
We kind of plodded on as a family the way we were going. We lost several family members through death. Our son, his anxieties got really bad. We had lots of things happening that affected the whole family. Ended up at the doctor's, medication, etc. And we keep being told that we're on the emergency waiting list in adult social care, and someone will get back to us. Every time we ring for help or to see where we are, they just say that they have to wait for a social worker to have a space on their case list. But this is something really important to us because Graham's retired, we're not young parents, and it's not a matter of when, but how long we can even look after our son. But until someone picks up our case again, which has been a long time, we've asked for he's got his EHCP this afternoon, and we sent out a request for a duty social worker to attend, but I don't even think we've got a duty social worker attending his EHCP.
Do you want to, thanks for that, Sylvia. Do you want to give us a call, and we can support you with that, to see if we can get somebody to listen. Kathy, is this something that can come under Embolden at this
Yeah,
stage?
I'm sure it can. So if you email us, Sylvia, and then we'll take that up with you because we can go in probably a little bit higher level just to alert you as a family with your permission, to say that you need, this hasn't been picked up and needs to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be really, really kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and thanks for sharing that. And I think that's it. So it's all well and good, and we hear that a lot from people. It's all well and good. You know your rights, you know what you're entitled to, you know what should happen, but what do you do when it doesn't happen? And I think that, and quite often it doesn't happen. So we need to you need to know what you're entitled to. You need to know what their rights are in order to be able to challenge. And we'll always say if something sounds wrong, it probably is unlawful, or it probably is going against something that they should be doing. So go with your gut as well if something doesn't sound right.
And I think the thing I would add there is that we do hear that it feels sometimes like social care are dragging their feet a little bit. They are under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But your relative has a right under the law. And you as a carer, once your relative becomes an adult, they have to take into consideration also the carer's needs here. And if you feel that you are no longer able to support and care for your relative at home, you have absolutely no obligation to do that. And so I think I would always say in these situations, what you have to do is make very clear that you are only prepared to do this for a certain amount of time, and that after that, it is adult social care's responsibility. And I know that feels quite harsh, but I think they need to understand that you cannot carry on doing this. That way they understand the kind of like time frames that they're working with too. Bearing in mind that we are working with some older carers in their 80s, and we've been pushing to try and get their relative into some suitable supported living. It's got to be suitable, so they're not going to put somebody somewhere that if it isn't suitable, but they do need to understand that it's not something that you are prepared or willing to continue doing. So we were very clear when we started the process. We said 2 years' time, we want our daughter to have moved. We gave them a long lead time, and it took 2 years to get it right. So I think you just have to be very clear that you're not prepared to carry on doing this much longer.
Absolutely. And we did the same. My son was at residential college and he'd been there for 3 years, and we just said he's been there for 3 years, he's got used to living without us. It makes sense for him to move now. So you do know he's not coming home when he's finished his 3 years, don't you? And had that conversation with them. And I think it's being clear. And I think sometimes as parents, it feels really hard to say that we're not prepared to keep them at home any longer. We're not prepared to have them at home. But it's sometimes the only way that you can get them to act. So it's a really difficult one, because emotionally you want to be, but but what we will always say is you're not letting go of them. You're just stepping to one side. So other people will be doing the support. And if you do the planning now, while you're still young enough and you're still able enough your health hasn't gone downhill and all the rest of it, you literally can still be part of their lives and then see them living their own lives. And a lot of the families that we've worked with, we know, have said the difference it's made. That, I mean, my son now literally, and I know he's probably an exception and it might just be that he doesn't like me anymore, but he literally pushes me out the door after I've been there for about 10 minutes. It's almost like he doesn't use words to communicate. He communicates very well with his body language by telling me, you can go now. I've seen you now. That's fine. That means I know he's happy where he is. So that's really good. As hurtful as that can be sometimes, I actually think, well, he's having a good life and he's where he wants to be. So yeah, I think it's that, keep the pressure on, and don't give in, and don't sort of say to them, if we carry on looking after our sons and daughters forever, they'll be happy with that. But the end result won't be good for anyone. I think that's the key. And that's been the kind of key message through this project is having your loved ones at home with you forever isn't always good. It's never going to be a complete option for them, because 9 times out of 10, we are going to outlive our relatives, and there will be, hopefully, our relatives are going to outlive us, sorry, hopefully, and there is, we're all getting old, so we're all going to need additional support. So yeah, think about that bit, and yeah, take a deep breath and say it, I think, Kathy, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next thing. So think about, Bill's support plan and with the support provider. So that you'll be looking, it's worth looking at some of the different support providers and see what they offer. I've got to say, having worked for a support provider and having had support from for my son from a support provider, there's no such thing as a perfect support provider that gets everything 100% right. So there isn't, because we're talking about people, we're talking about life, and stuff happens, doesn't it? Things go wrong. For me, it's always been how they deal with something when it goes wrong that has been the key. So if something happens that goes wrong, how does the provider respond to it? How do they work with you as a family? How do they work with your relative? And I think so we would never say, oh, this provider are great, because there'll be bits of that provider that are not great. There'll be people's experiences that haven't been great, but there'll be some that, that have had a fantastic time. And quite 9 times out of 10, it depends on the staff on the ground as well. But there's also that, how do they respond? So we would never recommend a provider to anyone. You need to go and get trust your gut, really. Go with your gut, go with your how you feel yourself about them. Have some questions. We do we have provided some questions for people to ask providers, haven't we, Kathy? We've got some of that information. These are things you need to be thinking about when you talk to them.
That's in the on our website. We've got the planning ahead folder, and there's a whole section on that you can download, which talks about all the questions you can ask. I just wanted to add here a little bit about support plans. So obviously you get a support plan once you've had a social care needs assessment, and that kind of support plan determines your personal budget and how much money your relative's going to get to support them. The support plan with the provider is slightly different because what they have to do is show how they are going to support your relative. And a lot of it will depend on how many hours have been allocated for one-to-one support. So that's what the assessment determines is how much one-to-one support your relative will get to be able to go and do, maybe go to activities or their personal support to go to shopping. It's to maintain all those outcomes that you get through the Care Act. But also there will be shared support as well. And that shared support is going to be with the other people in the house. So you know, some people, because of their needs, will get a lot higher one-to-one support, whereas some will only maybe get some shared support. It will also determine whether they need somebody to sleep in overnight. And often that sleep-in is kind of financially, they split it between the number of people that actually live in the house. But the support plan with the support provider is you review that yearly. My advice would be always do that if you can before you do the review with adult social care, because then you can determine whether your relatives' needs have changed and you can raise that in a review meeting when with OCC. It took me a little while to realise that. So it's about kind of trying to just manage that timeline because there's no point having a review with OCC and then having a review with the support provider and the support provider saying, well, actually, we think, you know, India needs more hours because it's really starting to impact her. That would have been a much handier conversation prior to my review with the review team coming in. Right, sorry.
That's okay. I was just looking at another question. So we've got, sorry if I've missed any, sorry, we'll go through them all. I would like my daughter to go into supported living with a particular provider in mind. Can this happen via OCC? So the funding presumably will come through OCC anyway. So it will happen. You need to talk. You need to be talking with the social worker. You need to all be working together on it. So ideally the provider. Are the provider part of Oxford? You have something called a framework of providers. So they'll have, I don't know why I'm doing this, it's like a frame, but they have a list of what kind of preferred providers, people on their frame list. Is this provider on that framework? They don't have to be, but it helps if they are.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if they are. I think they might be, but I have been told that they are a more expensive option.
Okay.
It might not be the preferred, but that's just sort of hearsay. So I'm not sure.
Okay. I would work with the provider. And yeah, OC. I mean, it needs to. It all needs to happen via OCC because they're the ones that are going to fund it at the end of the day. So you need to be working with them and say, look, we've got this, the reasons for this, why this support has to be with this provider and no one else. And the reasons why you're going down. Because if it's more expensive, that will be, it can be tricky, but it's not impossible. So I'd start and have those conversations really.
Thank you.
But don't take a blanket no. Always say, okay, so what else do you suggest? Because if they need a certain particular support, particularly if it's somebody that's got really complex needs that only this provider can provide, and that's the only one you feel comfortable with, that, you know, at the end of the day, it's public money. So they do have to be, and it's a lot of money that is spent on supported living. So they do have to be mindful of where the money goes and how it's spent. But if you can come up with some good arguments that nowhere else can meet their needs, it's a bit like when you're looking at college placements and things, you have to kind of prove that nowhere else can meet their needs in the same way. It's tricky. I've got to be honest with you. It won't be easy if they're really expensive. It might be difficult, but worth a shot anyway, if you think it's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the next question, my nephew needs 2-to-1 support during the day. Is it realistic for him to go into supported living? Yes. I don't see why not. If that's the support he needs, then that's the support he needs. It's as realistic as somebody only needing 2 hours support a day. And it's supported living. So the support should fit around the person. So if they need 2-to-1 support during the day, that would be written into their care and support plan, and that would be funded accordingly. Yeah, so I hope that answers that. Okay, so where are we up to? So
Financial assessment.
Financial assessment. So this is something that is really complex, and it's basically a whole other kind of webinar thing, isn't it, really, Kathy, the financial assessment? So basically you have to, if you are getting any support from adult social care, you pay a contribution. It's a financial contribution, and you have an assessment. Now, the financial contribution is based on your income, the person's income, not family's income. So the person who's getting the support's income, and that is usually benefits. So and it's a national thing that all local authorities seem to do, bar about 2 that have decided not to. And they have that ability to charge to pull back some money. And so there will be that assessment. They will be expected to pay for a proportion of their care out of their benefits.
Unless they're on continuing healthcare.
Yes.
In which case there'll be no financial assessment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I told you I didn't know anything about continuing healthcare. So money to pay for bills and rent, they're claiming, are they claiming all the benefits? I make sure that they're getting all the benefits that they need. So my son gets his benefits, gets his housing rent paid for through housing benefits. Kathy, your daughter it's all part of universal credit, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually what's happening, so there's lots of changes, obviously lots of news lots of speculation in the news about changes, but one of the things we have heard is that in Oxfordshire, people who are on ESA will be moving over onto universal credit. There's going to be by the end of the year, not sure if that's happened yet, but it means that going forward, that might change housing benefit, and their rent might come through universal credit. So we just have to watch for those changes. We don't quite know what's going on, but there is a plan there. And so, as Gail said, my daughter, because she's on universal credit, her housing rent comes through universal credit, not from housing benefit. It's so complicated. So you've kind of got to just wait and see where you're at when these new changes come as to how all that's going to be paid. But basically, the rent will be covered through somehow from either housing rent or housing benefit. And I think that's the main thing to know. Usually, if you're in social housing, housing that's run by a social provider, then there's no council tax either. So just little things like that to be aware of.
There's a question here, Kathy. How do you find out about how much housing benefit they're eligible for?
There's if somebody can, Jackie, if you wouldn't mind just taking a note, I'll send that out afterwards. But there's a framework for each area, for each local authority, and it's based on number of bedrooms and whether one of those bedrooms is needed for support care. So each area has like a threshold of what rent can be charged. It varies slightly as to whether it's a private landlord or whether it's a social registered housing provider. And I believe, if I remember rightly, the housing providers can charge higher rents than a private landlord can. So it's capped basically. But yeah, it's all based on area where you live and number of people in the house, and whether it's somebody who needs somebody to sleep in overnight.
Right, thank you.
And I'll send the link to how you find that out.
So when somebody moves into supported living and they have utility bills and they have yeah, to pay for the food and all of those sort of things. If they lived in residential care, that would all be part of the costs, and they would get certain amount of kind of spending money, I think. But you would lose some of your benefits in residential care. You don't lose your benefits in supported living, but you do pay your own bills. What we've done is, and I think this is happens quite a lot, is that we have one person in the house. The bills, the utility bills are all in her name, and then we pay a standing order. So for her, so my son will pay monthly to one of his housemates, and her mum monitors the utilities and things, and that works really well for us. And we pay a certain amount. They have so much budget a week for the food, and general and to spend generally. So that's how they monitor that, which works really well for us. But that's something to have that discussion with the provider when you're looking at providers. There's some of the things to think about. It's not something you necessarily think about when there's so much to think about, isn't there? It's not something you necessarily do right at the start, but actually it's something once they're in that you need to kind of sort out, because they are on benefits and their money only goes so far.
And a support provider will help you with that as well, because they will be able to tell
They'll
you.
have done it all before.
Yeah, yeah, and how, think like I mean, like just things like Netflix. If you've got somebody who wants to watch Netflix all the time, is there a house Netflix? How is that paid for? All those kind of things. It's just those little things that we don't think about because we just do it at home automatically. But as I say, the support provider will help you through all that.
They'll be used to it as well. They'll have done it before, so they're the ones to talk to. So finding a support provider that will involve you in those conversations is really helpful. Essential, I would say. Then there's the tenancy agreement. So they're signing in. My son has I signed a tenancy agreement on his behalf, and that was it's a tenancy for life basically that he's got. So like I said at the beginning, if we decide his provider isn't right, then we change providers, but he doesn't lose his house. The real tenancy test standards determine a real tenancy. I can't read that because I'm actually
The real tenancy test standards determine if real tenancy tests have been met. So that's just making sure that everything, if we were renting a property, we would have to meet those requirements that are set by a tenancy, and that's exactly the same for our relatives. And in our situation, because our daughter is a tenant in our own house, to ensure that she actually got housing rent, we had to show that she was being treated as a tenant exactly like the other people in her house. So she has to sign a tenancy agreement with us, and if she doesn't behave, then we can kick her out. Basically, we never do, obviously, but they are very strict around those things. Just one of the things to mention there is if your relative does not have capacity to sign a tenancy agreement, then if you are deputy through the Court of Protection, as Gail was saying she is, then you can sign on that on their behalf. If you don't have deputyship, we are told that you can apply for a one-off tenancy deputyship. Now, the Court of Protection, when we had a meeting with them, didn't seem to they just felt you had to apply for a full deputyship for property and welfare, I think it is, isn't it? Finance and welfare.
Property and finance, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got another meeting with them. So we're going to check on that because I think that's a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
So we're not exactly clear on that issue right now, but we have got
we've got a session with the Office of the Public Guardian who oversee court appointed deputies, so that they will be able to fill us in. We can ask those questions again, can't we?
Yeah, because if your relative doesn't have any savings and you don't need deputyship, it's a very expensive process to apply just for a one-off deputyship to sign a tenancy, but we have been told that can be done. So we will get a bit more confirmation on that one.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And then there's the other assessments. So this could be through an OT. Do they need any adaptations being doing to the house? Is there, do they need grab rails in the bathroom? Is there anything? So there'll be other adaptations that might come through the Disabled Facilities Grant, but there might just be other small adaptations that might need doing. Think about things like, because we do know some people that don't want to live in a house, that need a bungalow, all of those kind of things, but because of mobility issues. So all of those assessments will need to be done as well to help your relative move.
Sorry, Gail, sorry, is there special insurance you need to get, for example, because obviously our individuals may be damaging items in the house a bit more often than others. How is that managed?
I don't know. I think
well,
really.
I think what happens in those situations is that often the rent is quite high. And that rent will include a provision for paying for any maintenance. That's my understanding. So thinking of organisations like Kingwood, I think their rents in particular are particularly high, and that is to make sure that they cover, because they tend to provide support for people who are autistic and might, need that extra support and can, sometimes damage happens. There's kind of like a maintenance fee that's included in that rent. That's my understanding. And so you'll have often the house is owned by the social provider, social housing, so Advance, Cotsway, people like that. That's their responsibility, and that money coming into them is what will be used to pay to maintain those.
Yeah, and I think it's worth knowing at the beginning which bits you're responsible for. So right when we started out with Guy, there was I'm coming up to 16 years with him now, but we had the agreement with the housing provider was they would provide the furniture in the communal areas, and we would provide the furniture and everything else in their own bedrooms. So everything in Guy's bedroom he is paid for, and everything in the communal area is. Sometimes we chip in, and we've bought some paintings and new curtains and things, but essentially that was the housing provider's role. To do that. So you need to have that understanding right at the beginning. As far as his insurance is concerned, if I buy Guy anything, I always get insurance on it because his chances are he's going to break it. So if his personal belongings, yes, I would say. But as far as furniture and everything else, it's up to you whether you think it's worth it. But yeah, does that help?
So sort of, it's just the person who couldn't come to this workshop today, and she's working, but she asked her particular son, the provision is moving. He's already in existing provision, but they're changing from residential care into supported living. And first of all, for those who don't have deputies, the many providers do ask you whether you have a deputyship, and they prefer to work with those who already have it, and it takes about a year to get it. And you can fill the forms yourself. I've done it. But second one, in your particular case, your son breaking the iPads. He watches the videos on iPads, and they often break. Yeah. And so she's worried that what if?
But the iPad is paid. That's the same with my son. So the iPad, the TV, all of those things is paid for by him. He pays for his own TV. Okay. He pays for his own. So if he breaks it, he replaces it with his own money. So yes, insurance for some of those things is going to be essential. You need to look at each individual, but but that, you know, the housing provider doesn't provide things like TVs, and they will have, people have to put, in the same ways if you rent a furnished house, you don't necessarily always get the well, no, I haven't rented a furnished house before, but yeah, no, usually it's the basic tables, chairs, sofas, kitchen equipment, you know, kitchen stuff. But we paid for the rest. He did. Okay, thanks. Finding the right support. So Oxfordshire Commission, a number of, we've said they have like this framework. They've got they've been through lots of tests and things to see if they're appropriate, but still go with your gut, go with your own feeling, do your own research. You know, to be honest, they'll all say pretty much the same thing on their websites. They'll all talk about being person-centered. They'll all talk about providing good support. You just need to just kind of go and get a feel for it. Talk to some other parents maybe whose relatives have been supported by them. You may hear good and bad, as I said. You know, some will have had dreadful time and others will have a really good time. I think the one thing is to even once, yeah, is to have those discussions with people and get those get a feel for somewhere. Approach your support provider directly if you're setting up your own supported living accommodation. So if you do, like Kathy has done, you've got your house, you can go and approach, or if you found a house, even there's a group of you come together to find a house, and you can check out. You know, we did a little bit of a kind of Dragon's Den. We got them to pitch to us a long time ago, but we got them to kind of come and say, this is what we could provide for your relative. There's no reason why you can't say, look, they've got this budget, this is the support we need. Have a conversation with them. We've got the house, we're kind of thinking about this is what we need for our son. What can you do for that? Go in as a bit of a customer, I suppose, is the way to do it. A support provider will draw up their own support plan based on your relative's needs, and this is a bit of Cassie has said, based on the personal budget, looking at the shared hours, look at the core hours, look at the support that they might need at night. Once they move into that, it should be reviewed within 6 weeks. So nothing is set in stone. Remember that. It's harder to get extra in lots of ways. But you know, but it isn't impossible. So if you go in and you say, well, actually, we've done 6 weeks of this support, it's not working, they definitely need more based on this, and have the evidence to show that they need more support, or the shared hours isn't working, or for whatever reason something isn't working, you need to flag that up right from the start. How do they plan to introduce your relative to other people living in the house? I mean, this is an interesting one. So when somebody moved in to our house, they took a good while to come in and get to know the other people in the house, get to know the staff, for the staff to get to know them. They had tea time visits. They went on day visits. They gradually came and stayed overnight for one night, and then two, and they did it really slowly. I would say probably over about 6 months. I think it took quite a while for them to kind of get a feel, and it was really important. It was important for the person moving in, but it was really important for the people that lived there as well, because those 3 people had lived in that house on their own for the last 2 years as well. And it was somebody new coming into their space. So, and none of them have the verbal ability to express any kind of likes, dislikes. You have to know them really well in order to know whether it wasn't working. We did have a couple of people come to visit that everyone assumed that they would be right, but actually when they came to visit, we could see it wasn't right, and the staff could see it wasn't right. So for whatever reason, the match wasn't good, and we could see problems ahead. So having that time to introduce is a good option, and it's never, don't be rushed into it, I would say, unless there's an absolute emergency. But even then, well, if it's an emergency, it's emergency, but don't be rushed into making a decision, because it's a really important thing that you're doing. You've got to feel confident that it works for them. You might be surprised how quickly they adapt and how long it takes you as a parent, because they actually get on with it. In our experience, a lot of people have moved in and it's been great from the start. But others, that it's watching and learning from them. Take your lead from them. How is it working? It's never too late to pull out either. So if you're doing a good 6 months lead in, then if after 5 months you're thinking this isn't working, something doesn't feel right, we don't think it's going to work, pull out and say, look, it's not, and give the reasons, talk to the provider, have those conversations, be open and honest with people all the way through, I would say. It's not going to work for everyone, but there will be somewhere that they will slot into nicely, or you'll find another way of doing it. Do you want to add anything to that, Kathy?
No, I think it's just that I know social workers kind of put pressure on to try and get you to move quite quickly on it, because obviously then they can kind of sign it off their books. It means the longer that you take to do the process, they have to kind of keep you, as a case. So I would, as Gail said, just kind of, if you feel that your relative needs longer, then definitely, push back and say, no, we need to take our time on this. Don't feel scared about doing that, because it's a massive move. But I think the one thing I would reiterate, which is what Gail has said, is that I think one of the things we hear all the time is, especially from our older carers, oh, nobody, they're not going to be able to cope. They're very anxious. It'll be really hard. Yeah, I think there is a lot of that, but I would say the majority of situations we have seen and kind of been involved with is that often the person themselves have handled it way better than I think anybody expected them to. And I think it's often our own worries that kind of is the main thing, with kind of worrying more about how we're going to deal with it rather than how they're going to deal with it.
Really. Oh, I definitely didn't deal with it as well as Guy did. He got on with it.
Staff turn. You shouldn't. It's not always like that, and I think so you've got to just monitor. And I think the other thing too is when somebody does move into the house, kind of figure out how it's going to work best for them. So with my daughter, we thought, all right, we'll get, to try and make it easier, we'll have a home at the weekends once she'd moved in. That did not work for her at all. She got so confused about where she was supposed to be. She found transitions really hard. And in the end, we had to kind of do it as she was at a boarding school and just not see her for a while. We FaceTimed her, which she could deal with, but the transition from coming to where she lived to where she was living previously to our home, it just didn't work for her. So I think it's trying to be mindful of what's going to work best for your relative as well, not for you, but for your relative, even though it might kill you because you want them to come home. I think sometimes we just have to be more aware of what's right for them.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Staff turnover. Yeah, I mean, there is quite often a lot of staff turnover. You're lucky if you get the same people staying for years. That's not to say it doesn't happen. It does. We've had somebody working with my son for the last 10 years. Manager used to be a support worker. There's connections. For me, you're always going to get new staff coming and going. It's a low paid job. People are not going to stick around. They get promoted if they're lucky, if they're in a provider that move them along and help them to progress in their work. They'll move, but to me it's about the continuity of the support. How is that information about your relative being handed on? So sometimes getting new people in can be a good thing, because actually you get people that come, they've got new ideas, they come in fresh, they're exciting, they're wanting to do new things. We've had some great new staff that have started and stayed a few years and gone, but they've been brilliant while they've been there. It's just something to be aware of. Not very few people. You get a young support worker stay in a house looking after the same people for 30 years. It happens, and there are places. I'd be more wary of that in some ways, because people get stuck in their own way of doing things and may not have changed with the times a little bit. So having new people. fresh ideas. It's
Yeah,
always
which is why sometimes the turnover is good, because if you've got somebody that isn't kind of working well and they go, that's almost a relief. So, but I think the key again that I've found, it's the manager, the house manager, often that's the
manager
key.
is definitely key.
Yeah, if
And
you've got
you should be involved in their appraisals as well. So a good provider should contact you and ask you how the staff are and can you give some feedback. I'm going to quickly move on because I'm just conscious of time. We talked a little bit about having a driver on. Yeah, getting drivers difficult sometimes. But again, it should be if somebody needs to get around and they need drivers, you can specify that they need drivers on duty. If you can move on to the next one, care and support, managing money. We talked a little bit about housekeeping, shopping, cooking. Yeah, this is all down to the planning right at the beginning, isn't it? So what kind of support do they need? Support to manage their health, annual health checks, all of those kind of things. Communication, how do they communicate with other people? These are all things that need to be in the plan right from the beginning, and you need to keep on top of as a parent to make sure that that these things are being carried on once they're in there. Whiz through that. Moving furniture, we talked a little bit about who pays for what, and bills. We've kind of covered some of that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Maintenance of the property. We have two of the parents, two different families, go in, do a kind of walk around the house and check for anything that needs doing, probably every 6 months. Just so that we can kind of feed about little snagging list to the provider and say, this could do with a lick of paint, or that could, and they've been quite open to that. And then there's a bit about PAT testing, which is to check that the equipment that they've got is safe.
And just to add on that, one of the things we learned was that PAT testing, so anything that is the responsibility of the social housing will be PAT tested. So they'll have to do all the things like the cookers, kettles, things like that. However, anything like laptops or what have you will be the responsibility of the individual, which was something we learned. So.
And then we touched on the insurance bit, didn't we? Talked a little bit about getting the insurance. So if we can move on, Kathy. Monthly living expenses. We mentioned about you. We jumped way ahead. I jumped way ahead, didn't I? Ahead of myself as usual. So yeah, the cost of providing support comes from the local authority. That's the support costs. The household bills are paid for through people's benefits, including things like the internet. Different providers will have different rules about how they do things. Council tax, they should all be exempt from council tax anyway, but that's something to check into. Yeah, mobile phones, anything like that. All the other expenses are usually some that people will pay for them out of their own pocket, so they will have their own money coming through. I manage all Guy's money, so he has that spending money every week, and he has the money that he needs to go out and about and do whatever he needs. Kathy, do you want to go through this bit?
Yeah, so these are just kind of things that we thought might be useful to know about. So when signing a tenancy agreement, you need ID, obviously, which I think for maybe so you would need a copy of the tenant's valid passport or two of the following, and it's two of the following which could often be a little bit harder to get, because we know that with the benefits we don't always get recent letters. One of the tips somebody gave us was to apply for a provisional driving license, because we know our relative probably isn't going to drive, if they may be able to, but that is actually something that can be used as an ID. But you basically need some ID for doing a tenancy agreement. So deprivation of liberty. So anybody that moves into a supported living accommodation will have to have a DOLS assessment, because obviously often they've been deprived of their liberty of leaving a house property on their own. Usually, but that's done by the county council, and there's a massive, oh sorry, that keeps happening. There's a big log on that, but just so you know that there will be a DOLS usually on it. So India has a DOLS, which means she isn't able to go out without support. Recommend highly that you have a separate bank account for your relative. It just helps a lot with, especially once they move into supported living, because at some point, you know, we will not be around to manage that. It will be somebody else doing that. Better to have everything separated straight on. Parking, I think this is not the massive issue for families. It has been for us because we've got neighbours who complained about how much, you know, the number of cars that came from carers and things like that. It can cause problems occasionally, but I don't think as a family would be high on my priority when I'm looking at supported living for my relative, to be honest. Pool budgets we've talked about. So what's happening more and more is each person in the house will have their own separate assessment and they will have their own personal budget. What we're finding is that the county council or adult social care are looking at pooling those budgets together. So 4 people living there will pool that amount of money, and then it will be the support provider's responsibility to work out how they then provide the support to each individual. We've seen a little bit more move towards shared support, and I think that's something I would just say keep an eye on. India kept asking to come home, which she never used to do. When we got to the bottom of it, we found out that she'd got one-to-one hours, but she wasn't being given the support for the amount of hours she'd been allocated, and she was doing more shared support, and she didn't like that. She liked that time when she could go out by herself. So pooled budgets is kind of something that's happening a little bit more. Check with support provider whether that's something that's happening within that house. Ordinary residence, again, that's more around if you have, so if your relative ends up moving out of county to live, which does happen occasionally, they will still be funded by the county council because they're an adult moving out of this county. And that's really what an ordinary residence means.
There's much more details about all of this is in our Moving into Adulthood handbook as well, Kathy, isn't it? I'm just conscious we're coming to the end and we're not finished yet, are we? So
I think we're nearly there.
So yeah, this is about connecting with other families. So if you'd like to connect with other families who might be thinking about going down this route, you can create an anonymous pen picture using the person-centered planning tools, and we can share. We've created a database of families who are interested in setting up their own supported living. So get in touch to find out a bit more about that. That's really helpful. Then there's the further resources that we've got available for you. The Thinking Ahead and Planning Guide for Families from Together Matters, as well as our Moving into Adulthood. Kathy talked about the planning ahead tools that we've got on our website as well. Some of those might be useful for people. They've been developed for older carers, but they are for everyone, can be really helpful. Thank you for that. We need to do the end poll, don't we, now? Hopefully you found that real whiz through helpful, and if not, there are other resources out there that you can look at. Feel free to kind of come to us as well with any further questions, as I realise that we've gone over time and people will start to kind of leave now, but do feel free to get in touch with us, and if we can